Okay, so let's start with our invocation chant. Hi, Simi.
Hi, good morning.
Morning. Asato ma sadgamaya. Asato ma sadgamaya. Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya. Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya. Mrityorma amritam gamaya. Mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. All right, so we want to invoke the divine for this class, for our studies, for our life, so that we can move from untruth to truth and move to immortality. Okay, so last week we started upon our discussion on what is the world. We were introduced to this concept called Maya, which is a pretty significant word that you will hear in yoga. And it's important to understand what it is, what effect it has on us. And we were introduced to the fact that Maya is a power. It's a Maya Shakti, as you will hear quite often, which means that it is powerful. And it has powers that present to us ideas which our mind, which if it doesn't understand, can lead us down the path of ignorance and cause all sorts of confusions about this world. So the two powers we were introduced to were Wailing Power and Projecting Power. Two powers, very important. So Wailing Power, the word we call is Avarana Shakti. So it causes us to lose our contact, lose the mind's contact with the self. It forgets that it is the self. So we forget who we are. That's the Wailing Power. And then we have the second power, which is the Projecting Power, which is because I don't know who I am, I project all kinds of imaginations about myself. And that could be about my physical body, my subtle body, about this world, who I am, my sense of identity. All of those things are imagined. And I can create all kinds of stories. So a typical example we use in this is the example of the snake in the rope. So by not apprehending the reality that it is a rope, I think it's a snake. So that is the Wailing Power. I do not understand what is the nature of what I am seeing. The second is the Projecting Power. Now that I have a misunderstanding, I can create a story, which is the snake is dangerous, it's poisonous, it can harm me. I need to go to a hospital. I hope there's a hospital close by. I hope I have fuel in my car to be able to drive there. All sorts of things, right? And it's all based out of a lack of understanding and our fears. And we create the life for us. And we try to fix the world because of those fears. But the root cause is not that the snake is going to bite me, so I need to be protected. The root cause is that there is no snake. So what we're doing is we're trying to see what is that? Who am I? So that my identity is fixed, that I realize what is my real nature. And once I realize that, then all action that comes out of this place does not leave any remnants. It's like clean, it's free, and we don't create more and more, the word we use is karma or vasanas. And what we're doing is we are eliminating these vasanas. And you can say that the example we use is like the silkworm is spun, a thread and wrapped us in a in a cocoon, essentially. And these threads are like misunderstandings and wrong ideas that we have absorbed for lifetimes, you can say. And some of them are very, very long, so they're wound very, very tight, and some of them are not so tight. And the practice that we're doing and the work that we're doing is vasana purgation, which is we are unwinding these tight fibers. And through that process, our ability to perceive who we are increases. And that's all we are doing. And once the clouds have cleared, the light is automatically seen. So all we're doing is trying to clear the clouds. Nothing else needs to happen. And everything is sort of a consequence once the clouds are cleared. So any thoughts about this? Any questions? Anything that you might have come across last week about the work that we've done so far?
Well, what was the, excuse me, what was the Sanskrit words for veiling and projecting?
Yeah, so the veiling is avarana shakti. So Avarana is how you would spell it. And the projecting power is vikshepa shakti. So the root for the word is ship, which means to throw. So vikship is like to throw out. So yeah, it's kind of like the mind is constantly throwing out ideas that, the mind is a machine which creates thoughts. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is we identify with those thoughts. So we have to understand the right place of what the mind is, which is, it is useful, it is a tool, but it is not me. And ideas that it presents are based out of memory and all sorts of other impressions that we gather, but it's not me. They can be very useful, but we sometimes get confused and we start identifying with those thoughts. Cool. Any other questions or thoughts? If not, we can start our journey. I want to prostrate to my guru and all the gurus. So let's start. I think we stopped at verse 13. So this was the verse of the two powers. Let us do verse 14. Srishtinam Brahma Rupe Satchidananda Vastuni Abdhau Phena Divat Sarvam Namarupa Prasarana. So the manifestation of all names and forms in the entity which is existence, consciousness, bliss, and which is the same as Brahman, like the foam, etc. in the ocean, is known as creation. All right, so this is a very dense verse because we're introduced to new terms. Satchit Ananda is the first one, which translates to existence, consciousness, bliss. And Brahman is another word that we're introduced here. I don't think we have come across this word in this text so far. So first, introduction to Brahman. And what this is saying is that there is a self in us. All of us have the self, which is this light that is shining and revealing to us this entire universe and creation. And the word we give that is Atman, which is this individual subjective self that I experience and that I am, in fact. And the same self is experienced by you, and you are that. So, and it's not that, one Atman that is in me is separate from the Atman that's in you. It is the same. And the same from the macro level, the word we use is Brahman. So the consciousness that is the source of creation is Brahman, which is creation itself. We call, this is non-duality. So it's not like there's two substances and one substance undergoes a change and produces another. It is that there is only one substance, which is Brahman, which is consciousness, unchanging. So the question arises, if it is unchanging, how is it that this world is so diverse? And why is it that there are so many things that we experience? And the answer to that is that, we can only explain it with analogies, which is like the ocean is one massive entity. But on the surface of the ocean, we see all these different aspects of the ocean, which are waves, we see foam, we see ripples, and they appear as separate things. Like I can look at the foam, the white foam, and say, that is separate from the ocean. But in fact, it is the ocean appearing as the bubbles and appearing as the foam. So in the same way, we can say Brahman, which is unchanging, consciousness still, does not rise, does not fall, but it appears as all these different things, as the world, as trees, as the body, as the mind. So that's what this is saying. And these are sort of name and forms. Nama Rupa is the Sanskrit that that's the translation for name and forms. So there's massive diversity of names and forms, which is in this creation. And the second aspect of this verse is, what is the nature of the self? What is the nature of Brahman? And these are universal qualities of Brahman, which is, it is existence itself. And notice that it's with a capital letter, which means it is absolute. So there is no place where existence is not. So it has the property of beingness, like I am. Like there is no doubt that I am. Doubt is what I am, but there is no doubt that I am. And what I am is something that comes up, which the mind throws up. The mind never throws up the doubt that whether I exist or not, but it throws up questions about what am I, or who am I. And then the second part is consciousness. It has this property of revealing, right? Like, so you are aware. You're aware of the world. You're aware of your subjective thoughts. You're aware of your subjective experiences. Just like I am aware of my subjective experiences. So we all have this experience of consciousness, and it is the source of all creation. Consciousness is the one that is that appears to undergo a modification and become something else. But in fact, it is just consciousness itself appearing as this world, appearing as my thoughts. And then the last one is Ananda, which we translate to as bliss. But in the beginning, my teacher also tells this, which is, in the beginning, it's helpful to translate it as no sorrow reaches there, rather than bliss, because a lot of us don't experience bliss in the beginning. In the beginning, it's just like, why am I not experiencing the bliss? Everyone keeps talking about the bliss, but where is the bliss? And so in the beginning, we can say, okay, sorrow does not reach there. Why? Because sorrow is only limited to the physical. Like there's pain in the body, there's pain in the mind. So I can have, emotional pain. I can have physical pain, but the self doesn't have any pain. So sorrow cannot touch the self. The self is aware of all the pain, which is separate from the self. So I can see that, oh yes, my mind is emotionally suffering right now. And similarly, I can see my body is physically suffering. I have COVID, I have, fever. These are all experiences I can have, but I am not the COVID. I am not the fever. So those are separate from me. So pain does not reach there. So that's good in the beginning. But as we sort of go along this journey, we will start to see that the self is the source of all bliss. So whenever you have experienced any pleasure in life, you will notice that it appears from the source, which is the self. And I can prove that to you, but I will not do that right now, because we'll get to that in a future time. Okay, any thoughts or questions about this? Okay, let us do the next one. Drig Drsya Viveka Vaischa Brahma Sargayo Avrinnot Yaparashakti Sa Sansarasya Karanam. So the other power of Maya conceals the distinction between the perceiver and the perceived objects, which are cognized within the body as well as the distinction between Brahman and the phenomenal universe, which is perceived outside one's own body. This power, Shakti, is the cause of the phenomenal universe. Okay. So I like the word that they've used, which is the concealing. So what we're talking about is the, like, explaining why is it that we don't recognize the self? Why is it that if it's unchanging, if it's consciousness, if it is the only thing that is true, why is it so hard to perceive? The truth should always be easy to perceive because it is the truth, right? So why is it difficult? And this says that there's a power that Maya has, which is that it conceals the distinction between the perceiver, which is the witness, and the self, and the objects that are perceived. So for example, somebody, I'm driving a car, somebody like cuts me off, and immediately my mind goes and starts getting identified by that experience, and I get angry. And what has happened is that in that fast event, there is a subject and there's an object. I have experienced somebody cutting me off, and my identity or my ego has somehow gotten hurt, and I have completely identified with this experience. And this happens really fast. And I identify with what is being seen. But if I am conscious, the fact that I am the self and I am the witness will never lose, is never not available. It's always there for me to perceive. But it's just that because of my identification with the objects, I lose that cognition. And this is the power of Maya. And depending on how strong the object is, or rather my attachment to the object is, the stronger my ability to lose the perception. So if I'm really identified with, let's say, I have to give a presentation at work and I'm really nervous because I hate, standing in front of crowds and speaking, then in those moments, my perception of my self nature is not going to be very strong because the object of the fact that I have to give a presentation is completely taking in my attention. And I have no ability to shift my attention and move it and see, I am the self. So, so that causes me to be completely maybe overwhelmed by the fear of maybe doing a bad job, or maybe people will see how I don't know anything about anything, right? Whatever my fears are. So that's the power of Maya. It has the property to conceal because my attention gets focused on what is being revealed to me, which is the objects of this world. But the other great thing is that there is also revealing power. Thankfully, we are, it's not only bad, things that don't work, which is things which are concealed. There is this revealing power as well. The revealing power that, the self is available to me in moments when I am quiet. The self is revealed to me. So when I am doing things which are enjoyable, which I love doing, when I'm so focused and so in tune with the activity, my mind quietens down. And when my mind quietens down, the glory of the self is revealed. So it's not that we have, lack of a better word, that we are fucked. There are, there's, thankfully, the world has also preserved this other power, which is the revealing power. So I like the framing in this other non-dual tradition, which is Kashmir Shaivism, which is slightly similar than the Advaita Vedanta. And they talk about this aspect of Maya, which is it has both a revealing power as well as a concealing power. And depending on the kinds of things we do, either the self will be revealed or they will be concealed. So if we are constantly, numbing ourselves by drugs, sex, and rock and roll, then we are playing with the power of concealment. But if we are doing activities which are going to open up, our mind and disperse the clouds a little bit, maybe work on a thing that I love, maybe go out in nature, do some meditation, all these different activities, those are revealing powers. So there are powers in the world, in activities, that can cause us to either get more clouded or cause our mind to clear up a little bit. So there's this subjective aspect again. So we're talking about this whole idea of there's a microcosm and then there's a macrocosm. So from a micro level, I am Atman. I am Atma Brahma is like one of the Mahavakyas that essentially summarizes the teachings of the Upanishads. Like, I am consciousness. And from a macro level, this entire world is consciousness too. There's no difference. It's just that it appears different. So this whole phenomenal universe, it has from a micro level, I have a physical body, I have my own mental body, right? I have a physical body which is composed of these of the 5 elements that build my body, and then I have a mental body too, which is my own thoughts and feelings and emotions and memories that create my mental body. Brahman is the self. It also has a physical body. What is Brahman's physical body? The entire physical universe, the phenomenal universe. That's from a macro level. And Brahman also has a physical mind and the subtle mind. What is that? Well, all the minds that are available of all the sentient beings in this physical phenomenal universe. So your mind, my mind, all the minds combined, all the minds that have existed, all the minds that are yet to come, that is the subtle mind of Brahman. And that's so from the macro level and the micro level, you can think of, I love the images of fractals. If you have not seen fractals, they're essentially like these beautiful repeating patterns that exist in this world. A good example is when you look at succulent plants, like you'll see that one pattern of like arrangement of a few leaves, and the entire arrangement of the succulent, you'll see that it's like this recursive pattern where the same pattern is kind of repeating all the time. So you can kind of think of like zooming in and zooming out. So when I zoom into an individual person, you can see their own mind, their own physical body, and you can see the self that's shining, that's revealing the entire universe to them from a zoomed in perspective. But when you zoom out, you can see you can see Brahmans as like the self, and the entire physical universe is their body, and then all of the minds in that is their subtle body. If this does not make sense, don't worry, put it on the show, doesn't matter. The point is, you can only experience your own self for now. Put that on, put everything else on the shelf and see that yes, there is awareness, there is existence, there is consciousness that I experience from a subjective standpoint. And don't worry about anything else which is hypothetical. Any thoughts or questions about this?
Puneet, I just wanted to confirm something I heard. So you said Maya has concealing power and revealing power. So the concealing power, so like the activities would be like when we are trying to numb ourselves with like food and, drugs or sex or whatever it is. And then the revealing power of Maya is also through activities like walking, hiking, meditation, like that type of stuff. Is that what you said? Or
yeah,
something?
so I would say, in this work, we use the word punya and papa, which is, good works that are good. The traditional understanding of good and bad don't apply here. It's mostly when I say something is useful, is that it clears my mind, where my ability to turn my attention inwards increases. Anything that takes away from that, which clouds my mind, which makes me more ego identified, I would say is papa, which is like not useful action. So you can think of useful action and not useful action. And yes, useful actions have properties of revealing, not wholesome. You can say unwholesome and wholesome as well. That's another good framing. So unwholesome action has the property of concealing. which is it takes me away from myself and I get identified with my ego, with the world, with things which are false.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, let's do the next one. Sakshina purato bhati lingam dehena sanyutam chittichhaya samavesha jiva syadva vyavaharikah. So the subtle body, lingam, which exists in close proximity to the witness, sakshin, identifying itself with the gross body, becomes the embodied empirical self on account of its being affected by the reflection of consciousness. So here we're giving the technical process of what happens. Why do we get identified and why do we believe we are what we see? Right. So the embodied empirical self essentially is that empirical is like the process of observing something. So, when I observe my physical body, I get identified by, yeah, of course I'm the physical body. This is me. This is where I end, where my physical body ends, and beyond what is this is something else, which is not me. So there is this sort of boundary which gets created. And why does this happen? So the subtle body, which is my mind, and the word we are using for subtle body here is lingam, which is an interesting word. I've not really come across that in other scriptures, but essentially it's a form. So lingam is essentially like a subtle form, like an energy form, you can say. So our subtle body is not something that can be physically be perceived, but we definitely experience it in the form of thoughts, emotions, memories. They're all sort of subtler. And I think we went through the concept of subtle and gross before, which is, subtler is a sort of gentler aspect of the same substance. So, ice is gross, water is subtle, steam is even subtler. Steam is subtlest, water is grosser, and then ice is grosser. So in the same way, the subtle body is the mind, and like the ego, memories, all of those constitute the subtle body, and the physical body is the grosser aspects, which is the body itself. So all the organs, limbs, eyes, sense organs, all of those things. There's also subtle sense organs. I think we also may have covered that in the past. So there's obviously the physical organs, which are the eyes, nose, ears, and all of that. But there's also the subtle sense organs, which help us actually perceive, because if the subtle sense organs are not active, even though physical sense organs are giving us information, our mind is not really perceiving it. Good example is when you're so focused in a project, even though we are hearing things, we don't ordinarily respond to them. So I don't know if you've had that experience when you're so lost in a project and somebody calls out your name, you just don't even perceive that it happened. Why? Because your subtle sense organs are not in contact with what is being heard. So your subtle ear, for example, is not paying attention to what is being said. So anyway, that's the subtle body. So the subtle body is close to the witness. So, the witness is like also, you can say, I have an experience that I am a witness, and I can have a thought about that. And I'm like, oh yes, I am a witness. So when let's all look at the screen, right? My experience is I am looking at the screen. And then you can have a thought which will be like, yes, I am the witness because I'm the one looking at something. And, I'm looking at the screen. So I am the witness. And that also is a thought. Remember, that's a thought. It's not a fact. The fact is that I am a witness all the time. And then I can have a thought about a fact, and I can reflect and say, oh yeah, I was a witness in that experience. But the fact is that I am a witness all the time. There is no need to have a reflection to prove. To prove that. The proof is in the truth itself, which is that moment to moment, I am witnessing. That is the truth. And then I can have a thought about it and say, yes, I am a witness. But that thought is also revealing that I'm a witness, because I'm the one who's witnessing the thought too. So at all times, I am the witness. Now what happens is the subtle body, which is the grouping of the mind, our memories and impressions, they are producing thoughts. And what are they producing thoughts about? They're producing thoughts about whatever is being seen. So if I'm out on the street, I can have thoughts about, like, it's a sunny day, it's beautiful. I can have thoughts about things I have to do in the day. I want to go out, maybe I want to go on a walk. All the thoughts are being produced, and different thoughts are being produced based on what is being seen, right? That's just the mind. That's just the way the mind works. It produces thoughts. It's a problem-solving device, you can say. And some people have more control over the mind, some people don't. And that's totally fine. In this work, it is obviously useful to have a mind which is more controlled, because then you can be more successful in this world and you can solve problems and all of that. But it's not necessary to have a fully controlled mind. I know a lot of yogic traditions talk about, controlling the mind, and it'll give you a lot of powers, which is true, because having a good and strong mind and a focused mind is useful, but it is not the end all, because a mind is only a tool and you are not the mind. So once we realize the right place of the mind, we can treat the mind and the thoughts that it produces in the way that it needs to be treated, which is they are just ideas, and they are just limited. They are ideas based on limited amount of information, which is being gathered by the senses and my memories. So they're always limited. Thought is always limited because it is only based on previous memory. But with my ignorance, the problem is that because I have deep vasanas, which are like deeply rooted desires, and the desires and attachments, you can say. And what are these desires? They basically rob me of self-awareness. Like, I think happiness is where this fulfillment of desires is. So I have to fulfill the desire no matter what. There are certain kinds of desires which are not very gripping. So for example, I want to go buy this particular brand of juice in a supermarket. Totally fine. But I want to get that promotion at work, and I want to get that raise so that I can prove to my my boss that I'm valuable, and prove to my peers that I'm really smart. And if I truly believe that there is happiness in achieving that, I would call that a vasana. So that's an example of a vasana, where I have a firm belief that in fulfilling this particular desire, I'm going to be happy. And different people have different desires, different vasanas. And how do they get these vasanas? Their life. Gathering ideas about this world, gathering ideas about where happiness is. That's what everybody is doing, if you think about it. I love this framing of, I think it was in the Yoga Sutras, where they talk about the primordial desire. This entire world was created with this primordial desire that everyone wants happiness. That is the primordial desire. The problem is, everyone has a different understanding of where happiness is. And that's what, this world is moving. Everyone is moving in a direction, which is, I want to find happiness here. I'm going to try and do a bunch of things to fulfill this desire, because I think happiness is in having a very fit body, or having a six-pack. That's where happiness is. So what do? There is activity that they do to make sure they get that. Maybe they do get it, and then they realize, oh, actually it didn't fulfill me. So now maybe I need to do something else. So then I have, maybe the idea of okay, six packs is going to give me what I want, is going to be put on the shelf, and I pursue a new idea. Okay, it's not a six pack. Maybe it's a big house. Maybe it's finding the right partner. Maybe it's like moving to this particular country and starting a new life. Whatever. There are different ideas that everyone has. And we are kind of making effort to fulfill those desires. And these are vasanas, because we have a firm conviction that in fulfilling these desires is where happiness is. And sometimes we have to go through with these vasanas. We cannot suppress them, because suppression does not work. Suppression only delays the pressure, because there's something called vasana pressure. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you're like, I want to meditate, but when you sit down to meditate, there's just too much activity of the mind, too much discomfort, and you're like, I have to do all these different things. I have no time. I have all these things that I need, there's like project deadlines, and you get up and you just start to do stuff. And that is vasana pressure, because we have to do those things. Okay, so the coming back to this verse, because of this vasanas and the pressure and our false ideas and false beliefs, whatever the mind presents, I identify with it. And my identity, which is, the subtle, the ego's beliefs, you can say, that I am fill in the blank. I am, a woman, I am a man, I'm neither of those things. I am rich, I'm poor, I am, fit, I'm not fit, I'm smart, I'm all these characteristics. This is the identity. And this is just a thought that the mind produces, that I am healthy or I am fit. That's just a thought the mind produces. But due to our lack of apprehension, a lack of being aware that this is just a thought, this is not me, I believe that idea. And these ideas are essentially this reflection of consciousness, as this is talking about. It's not the real thing. It's like a shadow. And when you go looking for the ego, it disappears. And we see that in our meditation. So like my teacher says, what we're trying to do in this class and in this work is we're trying to tune up the mind. So if we can tune up the mind, get a little quiet, maybe listen to whatever sounds that are happening around you. Maybe there's some birds chirping, maybe there's some traffic going by, and you can just pay attention to the sound. And you can introvert your attention. Notice the space between the thoughts. And in that silence, your ego has disappeared for a moment. And then it comes back, and then it disappears. So when you go looking for the ego, there's nobody there. And that's what this false shadow self is. It's a reflection of consciousness. It is not a real thing. So I think in the previous class, I spoke about how ego is like a flame. And when you think about a flame, it's not a real thing. It is being produced moment to moment, right? There's fuel, there's oxygen, there's a chemical reaction happening. Moment to moment, the flame is existing. It's being created moment to moment. When the fuel is gone, the flame disappears, right? And interestingly, the word nirvana, I don't know if, does anyone know what the literal translation of the word nirvana is? It means blown out. It means without wind. Vana is like wind, so like beyond wind, blown out. So what does that mean? The subtle sort of aspect is that, there is a content for fire to exist in us, which is to keep us going, which is all of our vasanas, our desires. We are trying to fulfill them. There's all this activity where we are trying to seek happiness outside. And once those desires start to lessen, because we stop believing in the fact that there is real happiness outside in the world, that idea starts to diminish. Once that happens, we start to look inwards, and then there's this remaining remnant of fuel that's remaining, which we continue to burn, which is what this yoga practice does. And there comes a time when the last fuel and the last piece of wood that you need to burn is thrown in the fire, and then the fire stops. And that is when nirvana happens. And you're blown out. Like, there's an end. There's a good news here that there is an end to all of this. It's not an infinite amount of work that we have to do. But how much fuel you have is dependent on you, on like what you have gathered in your life. And it can happen in an instant too. It's not like something that you have to wait. It's just that, like I said, there's clouds that exist. The moment the clouds clear, light is instantly falling on you. But in order to make the clouds disappear, the work has to be done. So that's the only work that we're doing, which is to get rid of the clouds. Any thoughts about this? This is good stuff. I'm liking this.
Yeah, just so in this instance, the witness is still the self, or is?
Yeah, you can say, when you identify the witness, it is close to the self, because the fact that you're identifying a witness is still a thought about the self. You can never have a thought about the self, really, because the self is beyond thought. Does that make sense? So
yeah, no, that's exactly why I asked. I was just trying to understand how the witness, how it could not be a thought about something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the self is silent. There is no.
Gotcha. Right. Okay, cool. That makes sense. Thanks.
All right. Any other thoughts? Okay, let's do the next one. Asya jivattvamaropat sakshinyapya vabhasate avrittau tu vinashtayam bhede bhate payatita. So the character of an embodied self appears through false superimposition in the sakshin also. With the disappearance of the wailing power, the distinction between the seer and the object becomes clear. And with it, the jiva character of the sakshin witness disappears. Okay, so we also maybe given a few more words here. So the embodied self, I think, like we were talking about, is a continuation from the previous verse, which is it appears through false superimposition. And sakshin here is the word we use for witness. So there's two kinds of superimposition that happens. And the word for superimposition is usually anyonya abhyas. I don't think they've used that word here, but essentially what the superimposition is that I attribute the properties of the self, which is existence, consciousness, bliss, on stuff, on objects of this world. So there's existence, so there's joy-giving properties in my house, there's joy-giving properties in my work, there's joy-giving properties in my identities, right? Like all of these are superimpositions. There is definitely joy-giving properties somewhere. That is a fact, because I do feel joy in this world, right? Whenever I experience and do things that I love, I feel joy. That's no doubt an experience. The problem is with my misunderstanding, I project the joy onto what I'm seeing. So if I'm in a situation where I'm super blissed out because I'm hanging out with my friends or I'm hanging out with family, in my false understanding, I attribute joy-giving properties to my friends and family, which may seem a little cruel to say, of how can you say my friends and family are not joy-giving? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that what your friends and family have done is that they have put you in a state of mind where your joy, which is innate in you, can be experienced. So you have used your friends and family to experience the joy, which is always there within. And different people have different objects that reveal this joy to them. So I love playing tennis. I get great joy doing that. So joy is revealed to me through tennis. Somebody who hates tennis will never feel that, right? So it's not the tennis that is joy giving or misery producing. It is, what is your state of mind when you are experiencing the activity that you're doing? So that's the first superimposition, superimposing misery produce joy giving properties on the world. And then the second superimposition is the reverse, which is I project misery producing properties on the self and properties of the not self on the self. And the problem, so then the question arises, okay, that's great. How do I get out of it? And what needs to be done? And here the answer is given, is the only thing that needs to be done is to remove the veil. So with the disappearance of the wailing power, well, you can say the wailing power also really cannot be disappeared because the power is inherent. But what you can do is you can remove the veil, which is the veil that does not allow me to see, which is it, which makes me believe that the world is real. The world is where happiness is. The world is where stuff is. The world is, it feels so real. And like, my struggle of wanting to make the world and shape it in the way that I want, because that's the only way I can be happy, that needs to drop. And once that drops, this becomes clear, which is that I am the self. And here, the word we are using is that, when I am identified with the world, there is this character, which is the word we use is jiva, which is a limited person. The literal translation of jiva is a person. And, the Greek word, I think it comes from the root persona, which is to wear a mask, right? So it's essentially a false character. It's just something that is being created for this particular experience you're having. So you can be at work, you can have a certain character that you're playing at work. You have to be a certain way, you have to speak a certain way, but then you come back home and you're hanging out with your friends and your family, and your character changes. You become way more loose. You maybe become a lot more like, you can, play the role of being the person that you are. So this jiva character is constantly appearing. And because it appears, and because we don't understand who we really are, we take that character to be real. So when we are at work, the work character becomes real, that this is serious stuff. I have to like do things in a particular way, or otherwise, I'm somehow going to fail and be miserable. So this belief exists for a lot of us. It does in different aspects of our life, relationships, work. And the only way this can be destroyed, this belief, is that we have to have a clear perception of the self, which is when the wailing power disappears. And that's the work that we're trying to do. And we will, I think, in the future verses talk about what are the different kinds of samadhis that happen to us. And samadhi is basically an experience that the mind undergoes. So remember, the mind is the one that goes through a change. The self is ever free. The mind has the problem, and the mind will find the solution, will get the solution. So the mind undergoes realization. Nothing really happens to the self. The mind is confused, and the mind is going to get some knowledge, and the mind is going to transform. And that happens when it perceives the unreality of its own self. And that can only happen when, self, the word we use is samadhi, happens. And there's different kinds of samadhi, and we'll get into it. So does this make sense? The process of what the superimposition is, the identification. So, vikshepa shakti, we spoke about the projecting power. So wailing power happens, I don't know who I am, and the projecting power happens, I think I am what I am being, whatever I'm seeing. Any thoughts about this?
Hey, Puneet. I think I understood the concept. I am sorry, this maybe you already explained this, but the embodied self appears through false superimposition in the sakshan, which is self, or right? So embodied self, can you just explain that?
Yes, so embodied is something which is perceived. So I feel like I am the body and the mind, right? That is essentially something that I'm perceiving. I am perceiving that I have a physical body. Let's say I'm feeling sick and I have some pain. I'm experiencing the pain in the body. To somebody who is completely identified with the body and suffering because of like the pain, you cannot tell that person, oh, you're not the body, you're the self, why are you suffering? Right? To them, the suffering is extremely real and painful. So that's what embodied means. When I get identified with the body, it can either be the physical body or the subtle body. So an example of the subtle body would be you're at work and your boss comes up to you and says, Karthik, you did a terrible job today. Like that presentation sucked. You like really let the organization down, and and there's going to be like ramifications. You're not going to get this contract, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And in those moments, what's happened? Your ego identified. You think you're like, stupid, or like maybe you didn't do a good job, and you're like, how could this boss say this to me? I worked so hard about on this project and presentation, blah, blah, blah. So in those moments, your ego has become identified. So now you're identified with this character that you are this person doing this job, doing this project, and that has become real. So that belief has come up. On the converse, which is, let's say you're going on a walk on a beach, it's a beautiful, it's the sunset, you're watching the beautiful, reflection of the sun over the ocean, there's waves, the mind is extremely quiet. Where has that character of that person who's, working, who did a bad job go? It's gone. You're not even thinking about it. So the embodiment of the limited embodiment of the limited self rises and falls. And how does it rise? When we get identified. Why do we get identified? Because we have certain beliefs about who we are. So somebody who believes, they're from a particular country, let's say, you're from India. So something about India comes up where like people are saying some shit about Indians, you may get identified. But if somebody is saying something about, I don't know, Australians, you wouldn't bat an eye. You'd be like, okay, whatever. Why? Because there is a subtle identity that I believe I am an Indian, or I believe I'm an American, or I believe I'm an Australian. And when ideas are in opposition or in conflict with your belief systems, the embodiment happens. When I believe I am this, idea that I'm an American or I'm an Indian. And that's the sort of, so, when we talk about reincarnation, it's interesting. So we can talk about the reincarnation of the physical body. We can also talk about reincarnation of the subtle body, which happens moment to moment too, kind of like a flame. So when our identifications are threatened or like are in conflict, when my ego identity is in conflict, this reincarnation happens where I believe, yes, I am this person. I need to fix what this is being said. I don't agree with what is happening, and I need to change the world. And we all experience that in different ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And so, I mean, so if we are able to, disassociate from the embodied self and see the real self, or see the self, and
yeah.
So there are people who have diseases, people live with disabilities and ailments and mental health illnesses, and all kinds of circumstances. People are at war. So if these people, I'm not talking about an idealized situation, but if some person in such a situation is self-realized and still has a giant wound in his leg or is deeply depressed, I mean, I understand there are certain, I'm just trying to understand what you are able to disassociate yourself, the self, from the physical body.
Okay, let me give you an example. It's not so much about disassociating, because the word disassociate, you can never disassociate.
Mhm.
You're always going to experience, you're going to see the body, you're going to see the mind. A person who is suffering from physical pain, the pain is going to be there. But there's a difference between suffering and experiencing. So pain is something that exists. It's a fact. Pain is a fact. But suffering is different. Suffering is when I imagine or I reflect on the pain, and that persists. Right now, there is no pain in my body. So I'm not suffering. But but I can think of a past pain and suffer.
Mhm.
Right? So I would say, don't worry about a person who you have no idea about, right? So you mentioned somebody who may be like disabled and so on. Don't worry about that. You can only do your own yoga. So in your own yoga, when you suffer, notice that, is it something that's happening now, or is it something you're imagining? So if you're experiencing pain, that's a physical sensation, which is I'm experiencing something in the now, which is causing pain. Could be physical pain. But most people are suffering their psychological pain. And psychological pain is mostly self-created. I can give you some slack about, okay, you have a physical ailment, fine. That's like, happening moment to moment. It's a fact. Psychological pain is mostly imagination. Because when the actual event happens, we don't deal with that event in a way that releases the pain. So, the physical body has a lot of intelligence where it automatically heals and repairs, and over a period of time, the pain kind of goes down. But we don't have the tools that when we experience psychological pain, what to do. We just get spooked, and we just continue to repeat those experiences, and the pain actually becomes deeper and deeper, and it just goes into our subconscious. So that's a separate conversation about how to deal with those kinds of things. But the fact is that, yes, you can put pain in its right place, and you can put suffering in its right place. So I would say a self-realized person does not suffer. They experience pain for sure.
Understood. Thanks.
Great question. Yeah. Okay. Let us do one more. Tatha sarga brahmanoscha bhedam avritya tishtati ya shakti tadvasha brahma vikrat tatvena bhasate. So the character of an embodied self appears through false superimposition on the sock. Wait, did we already do this? Yeah, we did. Did I not copy the 18th verse? My bad. I have the wrong verse here, so I need to look up the actual translation. 18. Oh, shoot. Just give me 1 second. $17, $18. Okay. Nope, I was looking at a different one. All right. So similarly, okay, I can just copy it here so that we have it here. All right. Similarly, Brahman, through the influence of the power that conceals the distinction between it and the phenomenal universe appears as endowed with the attributes of change. So here, again, we're going from the microcosm, the whole like what happens from an individual subjective perspective, and now we're kind of elaborating that on like the entire like manifestation of this world, of like Brahman also has, has this power of like revealing and concealing. So the power in Brahman is Maya, which is the universal sort of power of veiling and projection and creation also. So you can think of like Maya Shakti is also the power of creation, which creates this phenomenal world and the diversities that exist. So in the same way that there is this identification that my mind creates, and I identify with those objects that the mind creates and projects, in the same way, Brahman also has this sort of like phenomenal universe that appears, and people and things in it get identified with the changes that are happening in the universe and think that the universe is real and separate. So it's kind of the same. So from a micro level, we look at it from a subjective standpoint, and from the macro perspective, we look at it from the viewpoint of Brahman. Again, this is just hypotheticals and explaining the idea. You don't have to subscribe to this if it's not something that you experience. Any thoughts about this? So it's just essentially that you can think of it from a microcosm perspective and a macrocosm perspective.
Puneet, do we like why? Like why does it why is it so hard? Or why did you ever talk about like why does what is the point of Maya then?
Yeah, that's
like what is the deal? Like why do we have to go through this or wrap our head around? You know what I mean?
Unfortunately, the scriptures do not answer that question.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Yeah, it just is. It's like asking, why is the nature of fire to be hot, right? Like, why is it not something, why is it not like cold, right? Like it just is. That's just the nature of it. In the same way, the nature of Maya is to project and cause creation. Why? Yeah, nobody knows.
Okay. And then the second thing, maybe more related to the previous verse, was so I get the hint or that as my jiva or whatever parts of me begin to maybe not be as important or fall away.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we're all done, is there going to be something left, or am I going to be like a monk? I mean, is that what is the deal like there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in Viveka Chudamani, which is like another, I would say usually is the book that's studied after this in the progression of this tradition. And in that, it's a conversation between a student and a teacher. The entire book is a conversation between a student and a teacher. And the student asks 7 questions, which is, let me see if I can remember. Who am I? What is this world? How does it come about? How does it continue to exist? What is the self? Oh no, sorry. What is the not self? What is the self? And what is the process of distinguishing between the self and the not self? So these are 7 questions the student asks. Teacher gives a bunch of practices to say you're not the body, you're not the mind, you're not the 5 sheets. We haven't come across that yet. And then finally, the student is like, great, I've done all these things, but then there's nothing left. Like, am I nothing? And that's caused a lot of fear, right? Like, it's like, okay, if I'm nothing, all of my beliefs and identities that I held on to and truly thought, then if there's nothing, then what else is there? Like, I cannot find anything else. And the fact is that you are none of those things. Just like how you are not your car, yet you can choose to own a car and use it and enjoy it and go on trips. That doesn't mean that you have to get rid of your car just because you're not a car. You can choose to not have a car, but you can choose to have a car too. What happens is that everything is put in its right place, and depending on your proclivities and your, I would say, nature, you will have the things that you will have. Not everybody is born to be a monk and a renunciate and a recluse. It's not needed. And it's not going to work, because are you a monk right now? You're not. So that's why, it's not something you're destined to do. If you are meant to be a monk, your life will automatically change in order for you to take that path. That's that's a fact that, I don't know if you've had certain experiences where life happens and events happen, and the thing that you need to do becomes clear. And if you're meant to be a monk, you're going to be a monk, but don't worry about it. That's not the problem. Problem is not about what I want to do. Problem is who I am. Once there's knowledge and clarity about that, then everything else happens, because there is no separateness between me and this world. This world is me. So I'm moving along with the world, and I don't have to have this individual. Right now, I feel like, we all have this individual puny idea that somehow my effort and my thoughts and my desires have to be fulfilled. But once we disregard, not even disregard, we realize that that's not the only thing. There is this deeper desire, and there's this deeper connection to universal thoughts and universal mind. That's going to guide our life, and that will make itself clear of like what you need to do and what needs to happen. And you will ride along the river, like, you're going river rafting. So just like, ride along the river and let it take you where it needs to take you.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so how many verses did we do today? We have quite a few. Nice. I think we're making good time. Okay, let's just finish this thought, because I think in the next one we come to a different section. Verse 19. Atrapya vritti nashena vibhati brahma sargayo vedastayo vekarasya sargena brahmani kvache. So in this case also, the distinction between Brahman and the phenomenal universe becomes clear, and with the disappearance of the Wailing Power. Therefore, change is perceived in the phenomenal universe, but never in Brahman. Okay, so similarly, we had a very similar verse when it came to like this, from a subjective standpoint, the self. And now we're saying that, from a universal standpoint, Brahman, the distinction between the witness, Brahman, and the phenomenal universe also becomes clear when, when the Wailing Power is removed. And once this Wailing Power is removed, the world disappears. So when we talk about samadhi, what we are trying to do is we're trying to thin the mind. And we can have moments in our own meditation when our mind gets so quiet that, the frequency and the volume of thoughts has like reduced. And when these moments happen, when the volume of thoughts reduce, we can see this sort of spaciousness and vastness of who we are, that there's no real concrete person there. It's just that this person comes and goes. When thoughts are active, the sense of personhood is high. When thoughts are reduced, the sense of personhood diminishes. So this personhood kind of keeps rising and falling. And our firm belief in this personhood can only be removed when we can have a significant amount of time where thoughts are almost at a zero, I would say, which is like thoughts have completely stopped. And the mind essentially stops, you can say. Mind is nothing but thoughts. So once thoughts are stopped, the mind, you can say, stops for some amount of time. And in those moments, we have a direct, clear perception of the self in its truest glory. And this transforms the mind. There's this huge surge of power that happens, that comes and completely transforms the mind, and then you're never the same after. And this is not something we can practice. We cannot practice getting to that state. We can't practice being in that state. What we can practice is getting prepared so that state, so we kind of slip into that state, kind of like, we can practice getting sleepy, but we can't practice sleeping, right? Like once you're sleeping, there's no sense of practicing, you're in sleep. So you can practice, wearing your night pajamas, you can dim the lights, you can play some soothing music. Those are all the things you can do. You can drink some hot, warm tea and water, but you cannot practice sleeping. You can lie in bed, you can get a little cozy, and then a moment will happen when your mind will slip into sleep. In the same way, we can practice reducing the volume of thoughts. We can look at all of our attachments and identifications. And what keeps our mind together in the end? It is the vasanas and the attachments and the identifications. Because in moments when we are really quiet, what thoughts going to come up? But what about my family? Or what about that deep desire that I have? These are the thoughts that will prevent us from slipping into samadhi. And we have to notice that these are what my identifications are. And then learn how to give those up. And then in a very divine moment, the mind will slip into samadhi. And we will go through that process, and I think the explanation in like some of the future verses. Yeah. Any thoughts about this? Okay, I think this is a great place to stop. I'm glad we were able to get to this point this week. Okay, let us do a meditation. We have about 15 minutes left. All right, everybody, you can start by closing your eyes, sitting upright, maybe if you were not upright, or if you're not still, maybe sitting in a particular chair, a particular place that you like. And just start by taking a few deep breaths, noticing if your head feels gently balanced and resting on your shoulders. If it's not, maybe just move it forward or backward so that your attention is not on any stress or pain that your shoulders may be undergoing right now. Gently scan your body and notice if you're feeling any sensation, any part of your body. If you are, maybe breathe into that part of your body. And on the exhale, so imagine that sensation being released on the exhale. We want to practice our subject-object discrimination, which is the process we try to do to tune up the mind, which is to make the mind introverted, to pull back its tendencies of going out, of projecting, and just stay close to you, and just like holding the mind and not allowing it to create more story. So what we want to do is just remain as a witness to thoughts, to emotions, to feelings, and not allow any extra thoughts to be created. So if you're having flashbacks of memories or things you have to do. Just notice that that's what the mind is engaging in. No need to judge or to stop even, but just notice. Because the act of judging itself, or even act of stopping, is another thought. So you're adding, but just noticing, you will see that these thoughts have some amount of energy that allow it to continue. But if you just let it be and you don't get involved, those thoughts will die away. And then what may happen is another thought may take its place. But what we want to do is we want to notice the gap between this one thought ending and another thought beginning. So you want to stay alert, stay vigilant, kind of like a cat waiting to pounce on something. Really alert, but not really moving, just staying still. And notice if you can just notice, not even as a thought, but just notice if you can see the space between one thought ending and another beginning. Maybe a moment, maybe a few moments, maybe a few seconds even. But in this moment, in this space, there's the space of consciousness which is revealed. Let's end our meditation with our ending chant. Yogarato va, bhogarato va, yogarato va, bhogarato va, sangarato va, sangavihina, sangarato va, sangavihina. Yasya brahmani ramate chittam, yasya brahmani ramate chittam, nandati nandati nandatyeva, nandati nandati nandatyeva. So I like how some of the work that we did today spoke about, enjoying and how we can really enjoy this world when we really understand what the self is. Once you understand what the self is, you can enjoy in any aspect of life and circumstances. One thought that came to me in meditation was about the question that you asked, Karthik, about what happens when you're feeling pain. There's a story of Sri Ramakrishna, who was the guru of Vivekananda, who was like a monk who came to the West to spread yoga in like the early 1900s or end of the 18th century, 19th century. And the story is that he had throat cancer when he was, in his last few years. He's unable to eat and like very weak, and people were very upset around him that he's suffering so much.
Wasn't he also blind?
No, he wasn't blind. He was. I don't think he had. Maybe I don't know. But this is the story. So there was a. He hasn't eaten many days. Feeling very weak, and then one of his devotees comes up to him and he's like, I've noticed that you're suffering and sick, but when you are, walking around and talking to people, you're just so happy. Like, what's going on? There's this bliss in you. And then Ramakrishna says, "Ha, you rascal, you caught me. Yeah, there is suffering. I mean, there is pain, but there's no suffering. So even in situations where like there's this extreme discomfort, once we become a master of this work, that can also be managed, where you can put the pain on the side, because pain is essentially attention. Where does pain go when you're in deep sleep, right? Like, you don't suffer when you're in deep sleep. Even if you're in the most painful state, everyone loves a deep sleep. So there can be such mastery that can happen too. Anyway, I just wanted to share that story. Cool. That's the end of today's session, and happy to hang out and stick around for any questions or anything. But have a good weekend. Hope you enjoy the weather. Spring is here almost. Hope you get some sunshine, and I will see you next week.